Hi, this is Explorations in Economic History, and we have reached 1917. So today we'll have a look at the revolution and the context in which Lenin came to power, and we'll look at what happened when the theory was put into practice. And first we'll start with a short video.
The Tsar army fights on. These Cossacks have marched thousands of miles across snow-clad plains. They boast the greatest endurance of any soldiers. They will die by the thousands in the frozen trenches of Russia. In the villages behind the lines, people are starving. There is talk of revolution. Wounded soldiers returning from the front listen and think, why should they fight? At the front, troops begin to mutiny. The army stops fighting. They will go home and divide up the land, kill those who stand in their way. In Moscow, Kerensky heads a new government. It endures 6 months. And then come the 10 days that shake the world. The masses take charge of their destiny. With rifle, bayonet, machine gun, the Bolsheviks seize power. Parades are held. These banners say, join the Bolshevists. The new era is here. Bodies of nameless heroes are given little parades. And the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty ends. An empire is trampled down. Trotsky harangues the troops. Later he is banished, and the Red Army is born. It is drawn up in Moscow's Red Square. Its commander, Trotsky, takes the salute. That winter, great famine spreads throughout Russia. The American Red Cross feeds millions, and still millions die. In Moscow, the Kremlin is covered with snow, and behind its walls is Lenin, who heads the new order. His wife foresaw this great revolution. She will be called Lenin, the seer, the incorruptible prophet, the father of Bolshevism.
So it was the February Revolution, which truly was a popular uprising and a people's revolution, that put the provisional government into power. And so the provisional government was very popular and supported at the start, and was made up mainly of people who had been in the Congress before, the Duma. And so, of course, there were also problems that people had with many of the politicians because they were moneyed interests and quite bourgeois and distant from the peasants and the poor proletariat. However, they were popular at the beginning. They had taken over from the Tsar, but they lost popularity quite quickly because they refused to take any serious stands on anything, and especially they refused to consider peace. They wanted to continue fighting World War I, which was becoming far less and less popular every day as more and more people died, and there was hunger and shortage and starvation, and people were dying at the front, young kids dying at the front every day. So as World War I became less popular and people wanted peace, the provisional government became less popular, and the Bolsheviks became more popular because the Bolsheviks had always stood for peace. So although their extreme policies were not, very popular with especially the peasants, they were still gaining popularity for their call for peace, and those who didn't know much more about the Bolsheviks besides peace, besides their call for peace, started to support them. And so their representation in the Soviets was increasing, and their popular support in the streets was increasing. Their slogan for peace, land, and bread was very popular, but was misleading because the Bolsheviks did not intend to allow the peasants to own their land in the long term. They were willing to redistribute the land, to take it away from the landlords, for sure, but then, of course, they would eventually want to socialize all the land and collectivize agriculture, which the peasants did not actually want. And the Bolsheviks' slogan, "All power to the Soviets," was also popular and lent credibility to them after they gained power, because they did pass all power to the Soviets, in other words, away from the Duma, and to the Soviets. However, they also wanted the Soviets to be under their control and to become part of their workers' state, their one-party state. And of course, this wasn't what people really had in mind when they supported the slogan, "All power to the Soviets." They didn't expect all other parties to be outlawed and for the Soviets to be directly under Bolshevik control. So war communism really refers to the Civil War, which started after the Bolsheviks came to power, and the peasants especially didn't appreciate the regime once after having initially been given back their land. It was then sort of expropriated. All of their surplus was expropriated, and their land was becoming nationalized again, and they could see that they wouldn't be able to keep hold of their land. So it was the Civil War that it usually refers to, but there's also a sense in which it refers to World War I, and that's because Lenin did partially base his idea of central planning and what would become the policies of war communism in part on wartime regimes where the militarization of the economy led to greater central planning, or state capitalism, as Lenin called it. So in that sense, war communism could be said to also be based on World War I. And of course, war communism refers to the period 1918 to 1921 approximately, and in particular, the planning aspects and the attempts to bring communism during that period. And again, a quick reminder that this war communism attempt, these policies, were put into place when the economy had already been quite ravaged by World War I, and there had been further disruption and chaos during the February Revolution, and in general in trying to have changeovers of government. And there were shortages of even staple food items before the Bolsheviks came to power as well as after. So although we will be arguing that the policies made things worse, it did start from a pretty bad place to begin with. As you are well aware by now, the Bolsheviks did plan to plan the economy, and war communism was the first attempt at planning the economy. And we can see this in the way that nationalizations occurred, for example. So small businesses were encouraged to socialize voluntarily, but large-scale industry was considered primary, and nationalizations were done by force. And this was because they allowed the formation of unions and of factory committees and of the linking up of the different industries within the economy. They were the backbone of the new economy, and they were where the Bolsheviks focused most of their attention. We can also see that after the Civil War ended, after hostilities ended, the nationalizations continued, and in the good times, if anything, nationalizations were ramped up. And there were, in fact, a significant number of nationalizations over the course of war communism, including 45% of firms hiring labor, and 66% when you include all of those that were just heavily subsidized. And full control over the firms was the intention, but was precluded by practical matters. So it wasn't only practical matters pushing leadership into nationalizing, sometimes it was practical matters preventing them from going the full course. A significant portion of even small firms were nationalized, almost half of those employing between 3 and 10 workers, for example. Now, of course, nationalizing firms isn't enough. As mentioned before, there is the linking up of the different firms beneath something like Vysenka, and also Lenin had a clear idea of the importance of banks in this. And so right away they nationalized banks, but their longer term strategy involved abolishing the bank or transforming it into essentially a central bookkeeping department of the communist society, or in other words, sort of um, the central transmission point for where the plan would turn into the resources for the plan, and essentially the banks would make sure that only things in the plan were were allowed to be produced by the factories. Only factories that were within the plan would be able to be involved in production. And ultimately, once the banks played this role of central bookkeeper, then they could slowly begin to, just allow money to dissolve away as they did things in kind, as they used non-cash transactions for everything, and the central bookkeeping was the role of a moneyless banking system. And they took practical steps in this direction. So, with the goal of abolishing money, the state introduced rationing and free goods and services. And Gregory Zinoviev, for example, spoke to, he is a member of the Central Committee, and he declared, I think, to the Central Committee, "We are approaching the complete abolition of money. We are making the wages of labor a payment in kind. We're introducing free trams. We already possess free education, free dinners, even if of a poor quality," he said, free housing, and free lighting. And also a decree in 1920 established that wages were to be paid in kind. And the same year, Lenin wrote to the Commission for Abolishing Cash Taxes that there, quote, "there is no doubt about switching from money to the exchange of products without money," and then went on to say that it couldn't occur just yet. First, it was necessary to end direct appropriation of peasant surpluses and move it to a tax in kind, because, of course, the peasants were revolting. And a declaration on February 1921 stated the intention to abolish all money payment of taxes. So they were still hoping to move in that direction in February 1921. Oh, and importantly, because they were so insistent on moving in this direction, on eventually abolishing currency, they did not mind when their policies began to affect the currency, devalue the currency, create money shortages, and so on and so forth. So there was, in fact, a first 5-year plan at this time. It was created by the State Committee for Electrification, so it's often thought of as just a plan for electrification, but I think Lenin used that term interchangeably with industrialization. It was really a plan to reorder the whole economy under Vysenka, the central planning body, and to, as Lenin said, transform the economy. It covered much more than merely what would be needed to spread electricity across the countryside. And Lenin also said that it would bring culture to the peasants and would eliminate the difference between town and peasant, and transform the economy and the people. However, of course, it wasn't actually put into place, into practice. Centralization was carried out at about 5 to 10% of what was intended. However, it was Lenin's intention to carry out the plan, and as I say, it was practical hurdles that got in the way. Lenin spoke very highly of it. He said that it was a real scientific plan. He said it ranges over about 10 years and gives an indication of the numbers of workers and capacities. It's only a rough approximation, he said, but it's a real scientific plan. He said, "We have precise calculations by experts for every major item and every industry. To give a small example, we have the calculations for the output of leather footwear at 2 pairs a head, 300 million pairs, etc. As a result, we have a material and financial balance sheet for electrification." So, what would have happened if the plan had been able to go into practice, and why? What stopped it exactly? We'll look at some lessons that the Soviet planners learned, and sort of see what went wrong in war communism, and then look at it again when Stalin attempted the same thing in 1928-29.